Bruce, we're not going to start with college football. We're not even going to start with high school sports coverage. We're going to start with drawing, because you did not go to college for journalism right away. You did not go for a communications degree. What was your major when you went to college?
Yeah, I was an art major. Unlike probably anybody who went to Northwestern, and my wife went to Mizzou, and all these people who went to these prestigious J school places, I didn't. I was an art major. I thought I would be a cartoonist. I can draw. Now I can't be I couldn't be a political cartoonist or any of the people who are making a living at it, because I can't make it poignant. I could do a picture of Abe Lincoln spinning a basketball on his finger, but while it looks odd, it's not going to do anything. And so in my late teens and early 20s, that's what I thought I was going to do, just because I was pretty good at it. I wasn't a good student, but I was pretty good, at drawing. So that was it for a while. And then I had transferred down to the University of Miami, and I remember I wanted, this shows how old I am. Sega Genesis it was the early days of Madden football, and I wanted a little extra money to buy it. And I was working part-time at a gym, and I was like, I could do what these sports writers could do. Those guys, that's a nothing job. I know more about sports than they do, or whatever. So I got a part-time job covering high school football for the Miami Herald in the Broward County edition. And that was kind of my first foot in the door of how everything started. But at some point I realized art was I couldn't make a living at that. I don't know if I was going to be a trainer, or I was in the gym space. So I don't know if I was going to be a trainer or a massage therapist. It was just, what am I going to do for a living? And then the sports writer thing kind of evolved.
How quickly as you were doing this just to pay for Madden, did you realize, I actually enjoy this?
Good question. I don't, I liked going to the games, and I saw really good football because I was in Broward County in South Florida, but I loved sports. So that was a big part of it. I was like, I could work in sports. I just didn't know if you could make a living at it. Right. And so in that office, I think there were 4 sports writers that were in the Broward office. And one of them was Steve Weich, who's gone on to a lot of success, at NFL Network. And Steve wasn't that far he went to Mizzou as a football player and then went to Howard. And that's where he graduated from. Wasn't that far out of school. He wasn't that much older than me, but was like he is now, was just super personable and great with people. And but we had a golf writer who was also the preps writer named Robert Lohr, who had gone to an Ivy League school. I think he went to Princeton. He was also it seemed like he was much older, but he was only in his mid-20s. And because he was the golf writer, but he wasn't really a golfer, and I played golf one year in college and I grew up around golf, he kind of roped me into helping him on the golf coverage. And he took a liking into me. And at one point he was like, and again, this is the mid-90s, 1994, he said, you got to get out of newspapers. Newspapers are dying. You got to find a way into TV. And I'm like, I'm graduating college right now. I have no TV background, no TV experience, cutting tape, any of it. So it was kind of interesting. As it turned out, he was way ahead of the curve on his analysis. Maybe that's part of him being an Ivy League guy, because I don't think he stayed very long at the Herald or sports writing. He got out and went into something else too. But it was kind of interesting window into okay, now what? I haven't even gotten in, because right around the time I was in college, the National, which was this, great sports publication with all these decorated, talented writers, had folded. So you had a lot of highly skilled, big resume people looking for jobs at the same time I was. So I had sent out a couple of hundred resumes when I was at Miami, and was hearing nothing back. I remember I was playing basketball outside my house one day in the summer, and my mom said, "Hey, there's somebody from the Hartford Courant on the phone." And I was got all excited. And the guy basically chastised me for wanting to be a sports writer and was like, "You shouldn't be doing this." And I was like, that was not there was just nothing. I got a call from a newspaper in Victorville, California. And I was like, where exactly is this near? Because this is before the internet. And he was like, go find a map and go look where Death Valley is. It's not that far from that. And so, but I would have taken it if I had ended up being, getting the job. That was the kind of time when I was in college.
So was the whole time you were at the Miami Herald, were you in college that whole time you were working there? Or did it ever get to the point you were out of college and it was kind of more of a job?
Yeah, so I was freelancing for them and I covered a bunch of different things. And it was good experience being in there. But then there was also, I had, at some point, I went back home where I'm from in upstate New York. And I was like looking for work there, couldn't get anything. I eventually got like a $5 an hour job. It was like 20 hours on weekends at like a gambling publication called College and Pro Football News Weekly. And it was in Long Island. I would drive down 2 hours on, I want to say Friday night and stay at my aunt and uncle's for free and would work there like basic all day Saturday, all day Sunday. It was like, 10 or 12 hours a day each. And would do that. And it was something to have on my resume. And what helped in the long run was Mike Francesa had actually been like the editor-in-chief of that thing like 15 years earlier. And Howie Schwab, who was the Stump the Schwab guy, had been there too, as well as Russell Baxter, who was like the big researcher for ESPN's NFL coverage back at the time. So it was, the place was relatively connected in some TV circles. And so little did I know, but it turned out to be a good thing to have on my resume because at some point, when I started working part-time at a TV station, WPBF in West Palm Beach, Florida, just to learn how to cut tape, not that that would have mattered, now anyway, but to do that. And then I was, again, I want to say that was another $5 an hour job, and I would drive up there and do it. It was good to have on my resume because I ended up talking my way into an interview with Howie Schwab at ESPN, and that TV station, I mean, I'm going all over the place a little bit, I apologize, but like that TV station, so the anchor was a relatively young guy named Craig Minervini. And was good to me, and it wasn't a big station. So I go up and interview with Howie, and one of the things he said to me was, "Do you ever talk wrestling with Craig DeGeorge?" And I didn't want to sound like I didn't know anything or didn't know, like I was, and I'm sitting there thinking, I don't even know who Craig DeGeorge is, and this isn't that big of a station. Like, what kind of an idiot am I? And I didn't want to go, I don't even know who that is. And all I said to him to try to cover my ass was like, I don't follow wrestling, so no. And then when I got back to West Palm and I went in, I said, hey, I'm talking to Craig Minervini. And I said, is there a guy here named Craig DeGeorge? And he started laughing. He goes, hang on a second. And he leaves the room, comes back, brings in, one of those like old VHS tapes that's like the size of like, a Bible, shoves it in the thing. And it's him interviewing like Andre the Giant. And I was like, oh, he goes, yeah, I'm not going to use my real name for this. I said, oh, and then it started to make sense a little bit, but that was my kind of pre-ESPN existence.
Wow, a lot to get at there. I want to go back to Miami for a little bit. I think I found this was your first, maybe newspapers.com at least, byline. September 29th, 1990. It was about a game that got postponed due to lightning in the third quarter, so it was probably a bit of a letdown. And I believe Chaminade Madonna and West Palm Beach Cardinal Newman. That game had to get postponed. Yeah,
Chaminade Madonna is a loaded program now. Like this is really good football, by the way. But yeah, I don't even remember this game.
Yeah, it was. If Cardinal Newman had played and won, it would have been that coach's 200th career victory.
Okay.
And Sam Bundick, but that was the first
Sam
one.
Bundick, I think that was
yes,
Sam
Bundick.
Maybe I had a typo in his name.
You know what? It is. The first line says Bundick, and the next one goes Bundick. So that's on your copy editor. That's
no, that's on me. One of those things I remembered. This is I forgot what newspapers call them, where it's like a jump. It's like two different headlines, a headline on the front page, and then the headline, you would jump to like whatever, page 8. And so there was a golf tournament there. And my editor at the time, who was like in the office, Sherry Johnson, and she said, what is this person's name? Is it Parker or Potter? Because it was spelled two different ways. And I was filling in for somebody. And I was just like, and it's not like back then you had cell phones. Like, it wasn't somebody you couldn't like Google it or whatever. And I was just like, I basically was like, I can't say authoritatively, I know, kind of thing. But it was just like there was a lot of stuff where you felt like you were like flying without a net, especially in retrospect.
The other fun story from your Miami Herald time I wanted to bring up, and this was, let's see, 1992. The headline: Team Tiger scores PGA personal best. And here's your lead. It was the last group of the day, and those who waited in the grandstand above the ninth green had stayed to see 17-year-old amateur sensation Tiger Woods. As Woods' 25-foot birdie putt leaked toward the hole, it slowed at the cup. The crowd sighed. Woods raised his right fist. Bang! The ball dropped in the hole, and the crowd of about 1,000 roared. So what was it like to be around Tiger Woods in 1992?
Yeah, it was a cool experience. I think that was only the second maybe PGA event he got to play. At that stage, he was an amateur at that point. What's crazy about that was, so I want to say a week before, I don't know if the Florida PGA Tour swing is still the same, but it was like the Doral, which had been around forever in South Florida, and then it would go up to the Honda Classic, which was in Fort Lauderdale. And the week before I get the chance, they let me go help cover Doral. And so Robert goes, I want you to follow John Daly around. And John Daly had just won his first big event, like within the last year. So he was a big name deal. And so I'm around, and there's a few other, it's a following of media people or whatever. And I feel like I'm the only one who's under 30 here at this point, who's in that little cluster. And so Daly doesn't play great. And one of the other writers had introduced himself to me, who worked at Sports Illustrated, named Michael Bamberger. I don't know if you know that name.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's a very successful, and he was at the time. He had written a really well-regarded golf book. He wasn't that old back then. He's probably 30, 35, but was very nice to me. Well, anyway, at the end of the round, the writers are waiting for Daly to give a comment. And Daly's like, I'll be right back. And I heard one of them go, he's getting away. And so like he kind of was ducking out towards the parking lot or to the locker room. And so I like jumped over a rope and I ran him down, and I got some kind of quote. It wasn't great. It was something, And so the next day, Michael, I think, came over to me. He was like, hey, I saw what you did yesterday. That was pretty impressive. And I was thinking, I could beat John Daly in a race like this. This is not impressive at all. But like, I think it was just that I got off my butt and to try to get some kind of quote, because I was just like, I cannot screw this up, kind of thing. So the next week, they had me go out to Weston Hills. I think that's where the Honda Classic was. And so our competition at the Herald, was Palm Beach Post and the Sun Sentinel in Fort Lauderdale. And the other two papers had the really established golf writers, Larry Dorman and Tim Rosefort. And Rosefort was like, ended up on TV, and they were just kind of among the deans of the beat. And at one point, I did that story that you're talking about on Tiger, maybe the first day, and it was probably about as good as I was going to do at that stage in my career. I was happy with it and everything. And the next day, one of them said to Robert, because they didn't have a second person there, something had happened, somebody couldn't make it. He goes, we'll give you like 2 6-packs of beer if you have him work for us today, pointing to me. And I'm like, this is happening behind me, and I'm just like a college junior. I don't even know. And so I was like, I was happy that they were saying it, like they at least noticed me. So, but the trade didn't happen. Robert hung on to me. I don't think he wanted the beer, whatever it was going to be. And so I did that weekend, but that was good for my confidence, as it were. Cause like I told you, I did not know I was going to be able to do this or anything like that. And, so the more I got to do, I remember I was like, because I also should have said this. I had transferred a bunch of times in college. I started out at Marist College. I went to junior college. I went to Albany State. Then eventually I ended up at Miami. So I like my transcript was a mess. What transferred in and what didn't credit wise, especially as an art major. And then I'm taking a lot of like journalism classes at Miami my last semester, but I'm also now getting good opportunities at the Herald as a part-timer. And so there was stuff I was missing that just like I would say to them, hey, look, I'm getting the opportunity to go cover like Marlin spring training or this or that. I got to do it. not whether like, do you think I can do it? I just felt like it was more beneficial for me than whatever I was going to get tested in. And then I would do stupid stuff like, you'd have to write some essay in one of those blue books, and I would just write, I'm not going to bullshit you. I'm not going to waste your time. I didn't prepare for this at all. Please look favorably because I didn't bullshit you for like, 5 pages.
And did they?
No, they like that I was honest, but I might get a D plus. It was not good. It was like, it wasn't going to be an F, but it wasn't going to be like a B or a C.
Right. So we'll fast forward then. So you have the interview with Howie Schwab. Is that essentially you got the ESPN job through that?
Eventually I did.
Yeah.
So Howie and I hit it off. Like this was perfect for me. It was all sports. I had said to him though, I had one of my best friends went to Boston College. We grew up golfing together. He had early out of BC, he got a job near ESPN. And so I kind of come up with this idea. I don't think it was totally dishonest, but I said, listen, when I talked to Howie after the interview, I said, look, I will work for you for free. I have a buddy who lives up there. I can crash at his place. It's not going to cost me anything rent wise. And this other part was true. Like I will work when I'm not. I can get a job at a bar and make enough to get by. And it's not like I had a family at that time, and it wasn't going to cost me a lot to live at some crappy apartment in Bristol. Back then it was $300 a month. I figured I'll find a way to make it work. And he thought about it for a while and he said, let me get back to you. And then eventually he got back to me. He said, yeah, I can't. I said, and I said, if you feel like I'm valuable, then maybe you keep me around for an entry-level job after 6 months. But I said, I'll work for free for 6 months or a year. And I figured I'll just do that on the side and whatnot. Because I was pretty confident in myself in terms of like, if I'm around these other, ESPN people, I was just like, whether it was right or wrong, I was like, oh, I'll be as good as them. And he thought about it and then he got back to me. He's like, yeah, I can't do that. They won't let me do that. But if I have something come open in research, I will bring you back in. And eventually ESPN2 had just launched. And so he was like, yeah, I want to hire you as our college basketball researcher. I said, okay. So I drove up I-95, whatever it was, 24 hours to where I grew up and was waiting on the call. And I was in limbo. They didn't have the head count, everything. So now I'm stuck in the house that my parents can't sell in upstate New York. And I actually played in like a semi-pro football league while I was waiting for the job to come. And I don't know, after a while longer, and I'm talking months, Howie called me. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm a receiver for the Hudson Valley Vikings and whatever. And he was like, really? And I was like, yeah. He's like, oh, I was going to offer you something if you could take a drug test for me. And I'm like, I can actually take a drug test for you now. And so I went up there, I took the drug test. Thankfully, at that stage of my life, I could take a drug test. Years earlier, I probably couldn't have. Definitely when I was at ESPN magazine, I probably couldn't have. But like at that point, I was in the clear and, started working. I ended up as what became the first hire for ESPN.com because we just had consultants. And little did I know that we were on what was called Prodigy, which was an online service like CompuServe and AOL. And they were going to lean into it. And that was my start.
Okay, we're gonna have to talk about the semi-pro football career briefly.
Okay.
How did you wind up there? How did that come about?
I was sitting at home watching local TV, and they had one of the coaches was on talking about it. And I was like, I got nothing else going on right now. let me try to do this. So the team practiced at the time about a half hour from where I lived or grew up. And so I was in good shape. Like I was always a workout guy, especially at that point. And so we ran a run and shoot. I played. I remember a lot of my teammates were either corrections officers or bouncers. And it was a good experience. I just remembered You met some really interesting people. I'll say that. And it was only, I want to say, Howie called me after our first game. So it had been practices and everything, but like, um, it was an interesting window into that because like there are certain areas where semi-pro football, maybe guys who are, my teams, I felt like we were a bunch of Division 3 players, maybe some one double A guys at the time, but it was it was definitely an interesting experience for as long as it lasted, and then to go to ESPN. And then I remember they once called me, and I said, I could probably help you guys PR wise or whatever, just to like, because they were like, "What do you do at ESPN now?" And I told them, and they were just kind of blue because at that time ESPN was the only thing it felt like, and so it was such a different little world to be in. I always thought it would make a great book to find the right semi-pro team because there's so many awesome stories in there. Like one of the guys I used to give a ride to practice to had been in the military, and he had told me, he was like, "Hey, don't say anything, but I like to line up on I forgot what it was, the left side of the formation." I was like, "Why is that?" And he was like, "Well, I was in a bar fight and I got stabbed. I don't have a lot of feeling in my left hand." And
Oh
it's
my.
like, as a receiver, that's probably not a great thing. But he was like, it's usually you hear guys who are like one eye dominant as receivers. You don't hear like one hand dominant just because of a bar fight of a stabbing or something.
Is there a VHS somewhere of a Bruce Feldman game tape from, oh
No, this
man,
is
that
so
would be,
long ago. It's like, I think, yeah, there's just,
I don't know, were your parents at the game taking, with the camcorder?
I don't even know, this is so long ago. There weren't even like camcorders,
Yeah.
but I do
Cool.
remembered, we played on old artificial turf, and it was like, I'm not saying it was like the vet, but it probably was. So you would like kind of scar differently and everything. So it was fine. It was like I said, I wasn't there that long, but it was through
Right.
practice. We had one game. I want to say we played like the Milford Redskins, maybe, or so. But it was it was an interesting window back then.
So your first job, you're like the first .com employee. You're doing college basketball research. What does that entail? Like, what was your day to day as you got started at ESPN?
Yeah, the college basketball research job didn't end up happening.
Okay.
Howie Howie was the Dan Patrick Keith Olbermann. He was the head of ESPN's research, but that was that time. And I remember I'd started, and because I grew up playing golf and I was playing a bunch before I got there, that was a great way to connect with people. Like I used to golf with Carl Ravitch a lot, who's a really good golfer. I would golf with a bunch of other people. It was a good way to meet people. I wasn't bad, so I could, like kind of connect with people that way. But so back then, everything was on these terminals. Like you ever saw the movie like War Games, where it was like the computer screen was like all black, just like lime green characters in front. That's what those computer terminals were like. They weren't like PCs. They're called BASYS, BAYSYS, and it was like probably the same, similar to what like newspapers would kind of operate on back then. Big heavy computers, big heavy desktops. We actually had actual computers, but there was only two of them. And so ESPN had hired this MIT consultant to help them kind of get going. And then eventually we partnered with a Paul Allen company called Starwave in Seattle. Well, at one point, like Howie is coming over he hired me, but he was going to leave research, I want to say like November 1st, basically after the baseball season. And he said, I said, "Do you think this is really going to work?" Because I'm at working at ESPN thinking my goal is to try to get the UCLA football beat job for the LA Times because that's what I think I want to, because I want to go to newspapers at that point. I'm not thinking this is going to, go somewhere. And so I said to Howie, I was like, "Do you think this is really going to work and here take off?" And he goes, "I don't know, but people a lot smarter than me and you think it is. So just get in the back of the car and start pushing." And so we were in there. My job was basically like a 9 to 7 daily job where you would try to put stories on what was there. It wasn't really even the internet yet. We went on the internet. So I started in July or June of '94. The following year at the Final Four was in Seattle. And we partnered with this Paul Allen company who was way ahead of us technology wise. And that's when we became, I think we were ESPN Net Sports Zone, and eventually became ESPN Net, and then it became ESPN.com. But it took a while to get to that point. And we were like cavemen because we didn't know like how to cut and paste anything. We would do this thing called prisoner exchange where like one of our Bristol people would fly out and spend a week in Seattle and one of theirs would come back. And they had a bunch of people who had just graduated from the University of Washington, and Ted Bishop, who was around my age, UW guy, very smart. And he worked at ESPN a long time. Ted came back for a week. And I remember it was like Ted showed us all these little tricks around how to work on a computer, which like any 4-year-old knows now. But back then, we didn't have email, anything. We didn't have the rights to a lot of video on stuff. So it was just, again, I keep going, it was like showing cavemen fire. We were just so clueless about what was going on. And so because I shared an office with Howie, and on the other side of the wall of our office was John Walsh's office, and John Walsh was like the godfather at ESPN. But because everybody leaned on Howie, it was interesting for me because I was a huge ESPN fan, and here's like I'm working with Dan Patrick now. I mean, I remember my mom came up to visit me once, and like she was like she knew who Dan Patrick was, and just the fact that I'm like around them. We'd also have those "This is ESPN" commercials. So you're standing at the urinal, and all of a sudden like Yokozuna, the sumo wrestler's foot is under your side, or you just had all these surreal moments in there because you're at ESPN. It was a very informal time. It's like way before 9/11, so anybody could have walked in the building from got off whatever the street was that Middle Street or whatever ran through ESPN. It was just such a different era then. It was a fun place to be, but it was also, it was just a very different time in the world.
Do you remember your first piece of writing at ESPN when you first got to actually have something kind of published?
I'd have to think about that for a second because I did do a lot of writing, and they sent us to a lot of events, right? Because like we would go cover I remember one year the NBA All-Star Game was in San Antonio. I want to say it was Kevin Garnett's rookie year. And so myself and one of my colleagues who had come over from the SportsCenter side, Phil Green, we did like 17 or 18 pieces of, like we were just cranking out content, whether it was good or not, I don't know. The first like extensive story I remember doing, I did like a two-part, it wasn't serious, two-part story on head injuries in the NFL because I had ended up getting into this conversation, and John Henry Johnson, who was a Hall of Fame running back who had been with the Steelers and the 49ers, I just had a couple of really deep conversations with his wife, and he had, it was like, this is way before anybody was talking about CTE, but it was it was a story I was proud of, especially like at that point, it's not like we had Monday Night Football or anything like that, but ESPN and the people I worked with were very supportive. I didn't really know what I was doing in the process of it because, like I said, I didn't go to college for this. So I was learning on the fly, but I was pretty good at connecting with people and pretty good at able to get an interview and get people to talk me through stuff. And I realized I liked that. And I was lucky because I worked with Howie, and Howie knew a lot. But it wasn't like it was journalism training, but I would sit there and figure out like, even from my days working with Phil, he used to have this thing that was like and he had this like New York accent. He was like, he's good is not a story. And I took that with me because you never want, like, it had to have some kind of angle to it. And I think that helped me. And then when I got to ESPN Magazine a little later, I was lucky enough that I was still pretty young. I would sit in the room where all the editors would have story pitches, and I kind of learned what became a good story pitch because I would say, I know what's on the other side of the equal sign. It's a formula. You got to figure out what it is to get to the equal sign, but I know what the other side of the equal sign looks like. And that was something I think I got really good at. Of all the things I think I could have leaned into was knowing what a story is and knowing how to pitch a story, because I think I was just around a lot of it at ESPN, and I was just kind of had my ears open and my eyes open.
So I always ask people for their welcome to the big leagues moment. And like hearing this, you could have been John Daly, it could have been Tiger Woods, it could have been whoever. But like, do you have one that stands out, like where it's like, oh, this is real. I am in this business, and people now know who I am. And like, what are things that maybe stand out in that category?
This isn't this, like, I got a bunch of them, but like I'm trying to think of which is the best way to do it. Like I remember I go to early on, we would go to the Hall of Fame, NFL Hall of Fame game weekend. I think they sent me like 4 years in a row. And because I worked with Howie, it was almost like you were somebody's like nephew, like who they, liked. And so Chris Berman, who I only knew through Howie, I ended up traveling with. I sat next to him on the flight from Hartford to Pittsburgh or wherever. That was like a two-stop, to get to Canton. And I remembered he's not like Van Pelt. He's a big guy. So it's not like he's like 5'8". He's going to stand out whether he's super famous or not, but he's like 6'5". And he's the guy who everybody felt like they could approach. And we had to go from one, on a stopover. And it was amazing how many people stopped to talk to him, and just and he was great with I don't know him particularly well, but that always stayed with me of how he treated people. And for the most part, the ESPN people I was around who, not everybody's famous. They were behind the scenes people, but a bunch of them really were, because you feel like they're approachable because you see them on SportsCenter or whatever. And that stayed with me for a long time of how do you, they're your customers. I don't know if anybody ever used that term, but I felt like that when I got to when I was writing, even behind a paywall, I felt like they are our customers. You want to, and I feel like it was also a different time where people weren't like super snarky or, they weren't even, nobody ever heard of bots or anything like that. So your interactions were always felt like pretty genuine. But it's like still kind of blows your mind. Like, to me, my biggest like holy shit moment was like, this is way later in my career, but like going to I was still at ESPN, but it was like Auburn was playing for the national title game. They were playing Oregon, and it was only about like 15 years ago. And I was somewhere, and Charles Barkley knew who I was, and it blew my mind. Like, it just like, because it's not like I was covering basketball or the NBA, but just the fact that you always think, like, when I moved out to LA for the first time, it's like 2003, and I didn't do a ton of TV then. I would have like a 9-minute ESPN news hit on Mondays, but the sports shows would watch it or get it. And so I would go to this bar, and I couldn't believe people, who were in the bar knew who I was off that. Like, I wasn't even making the effort to put on a jacket and tie for that thing. It was just a dress shirt. But like, it's crazy how small the world gets when people see you from that. I'd written hundreds of stories at the time, but once you start doing TV, it's really humbling and kind of like jaw-dropping to feel like when people know who you are. I mean, that takes on another life of its own.
Do you remember how and when you became the college football guy? I mean, that's what you do for us at The Athletic. It's what you don't do on Fox Sports. It's what you've done for, gosh, it feels like it's been 20 years.
It has been, yeah.
Yeah. So how did you segue into that?
Well, for a little while, I was at ESPN Magazine, and it was a great place for me to learn. And I had said to myself, I always want to do stories that they do not want to put on the cover, meaning like they're either stories that are not just like, oh, we're going to put a big name on this. There's deeper stories. And I had a run where they had, they were pretty big stories that the editors were into. I did a story on Mount Zion and how the basketball program, how it just kind of was stolen and went someplace. And it's just like, a lot of crazy stories. And at one point, the guy who was kind of running the magazine is a guy named Gary Honig, and he brought me in. He said, "Look, you have kind of two paths you can take. You can give us these stories, keep doing these stories that we really like, or you could be the college football guy, which there's a void here. Like, we don't have somebody for that. And you clearly know this and you're making connections." Because I would go to, like, back then, I would go as early as, or late as 1999. I would go to the AFCA, the Football Coaches Convention, where there's like 1,000 football coaches, and nobody else in the media would go. Like, they started going like 5 years later, 8 years later, but I'd be the only one there. And so I started making a ton of connections that way. And so I thought about that, what he said, which do you want to do? And some of these other stories, they were dark stories, they were heavy stories, they were exhausting. Like, when you get done with them, you don't feel like, you feel exhausted. And then I sat there and thought, like, when I was early on in my Bristol days, Peter Gammons was there and Chris Mortensen were there, and they were the insiders of their respective sports. And they were both really great to us, or to me. I liked both of them. They operated a little bit differently in how they worked, but they were both like really supportive. But you saw the exposure they got and the platform, and I was like, I could tell, like, Gary probably wanted, he didn't, a lot of those New York City guys, they care about the Giants and the Knicks and maybe the Yankees and the Mets. They don't care at all about college football. So, but I was like, I want to pick that lane. I want to go in the college football lane. And I'm glad I did, because I love the sport as much now, if not more, than I ever did. And I've learned a ton about it. Now, there's a bunch of others, like, I still get to be like an NFL fan. I still get to be an NBA fan, but it's like, I'm not looking at everything. Like, those other stories, I'm glad that other people still do them, but they're stories that, like, I don't have the stomach to do them anymore, because some of them are dark. Some of them are really, I remember, like, I did a story on a football player, who was like a fugitive for 2 years. And the story was a crazy story. I remember at one point I interviewed the guy in a prison in Northern California. I was just like, I don't know if this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I'm glad it's a pivot I made.
When you look back and you think about the beginning of your career, Miami Herald, and then cutting tape and all those things, to Bruce Feldman today, what's kind of that through line? What are the things, like the traits you learned, the things people taught you that still matter when you are writing the stories that you write, or doing your sideline reports in 2025?
Just to be really curious, and to, if you have the story sense of knowing what's a good story. I mean, I just got back from Texas, where the Big 12 Media Days were. There was something that was definitely not on my budget or anywhere on my radar, but I end up in a conversation with somebody, and I'm like, I couldn't, like, after the conversation, I could not text my editor fast enough to be like, hey, I got something I think we should do. Now, sometimes the stories are going to blow up and do great numbers, and sometimes they're not. But I'm like, I feel like if I'm really interested and really passionate about it, I want to go do it. I'm thankful that I'm at The Athletic, where we have the bandwidth to go do it. I'm also thankful I'm at The Athletic, where I don't need to chase some of the minutia that I spent 15 years on the college football beat chasing all of it. Like, I mean, you're a young parent. I'm a not so young parent, but my kids are 11. And there was a time that I remember thinking, my daughter, when she was a little younger, asked me, I was like, is this like, because I said, hey, I'll be right back. And just 5 minutes. And she was like, is this going to be a real 5 minutes or like a daddy 5 minutes? And I was like, oh, okay. And I came back like, whatever, 15 minutes later. And she was like, was that really that important? And I was like, no, it wasn't. And so you try to take the best things you can and what you've learned. And I think you see it through a different prism. I mean, I did like a Arch Manning story this summer that I would never have gone down this road, I don't think, of the angle of the story, if I wasn't at a certain stage in my life where, as a parent, as somebody who like coaches my kid, I just see things through that prism. I'm not like a savvy business mind or anything like that. So I'm not going to see things through any of that prism. But in terms of this, it's stuff that maybe can be relatable to people in the parenting space or whatever. It's not just like, oh, Arch Manning is going to be the first pick in the draft. We have other people who can write that story. I don't need to try to lean into that too. So it's just, I still love it, but I kind of see it from through a little bit of a different lens right now.
If somebody came to you for advice on breaking into sports media, what do you tell them?
I would tell them, if you have to love what you're doing, because the hours are going to be weird. It's not to say people don't work hard in other jobs, because they absolutely do, but like, you're going to miss a lot of stuff. You're going to miss a lot of stuff of your kid and your family situations. But I think it's like, there's a couple of things to that. You want to really be a hard worker and have it like be passionate about it. The other thing that's like may sound like a like kind of a stupid statement, but like be a good person. Like when I was at ESPN magazine in my younger days, I was probably still in my 20s. On the other side of the cubicle was our baseball department, and I'd listen to our senior editor and our associate editor talk about certain things, and there were certain writers they didn't want to work with because they were pains in the ass. And if that's the case, eventually people are not going to work with you because they just don't. Nobody wants to deal with that. And yeah, if you're super talented, or you're like, if you bring something to the table where like you're friends with the boss or they have to have you or whatever, yeah, great. But a lot of times, if you're a pain in the butt and people don't want to be around you, and that could be like you're tough to deal with, as like if you're a reporter and nobody likes, then they're not probably going to talk to somebody else. There's enough people out there. And so, I mean, just be nice. Don't be an ass, and don't, try not to be entitled and think you're way better than you are. Like, I know of plenty of writers who are really talented, but they were really tough to edit. Like, I get it. My editor has a job to do, and you try to, keep that in mind whenever she has something where it's like, it's got to be a relationship. Like everything we do is relationship based, right? What you do on the beat, what you do with your editor, what you do with your coworkers, it's all relationship based. Like there's certain things I know I can help with, and there's other things I can't. But I know even like, it's just, if you can help somebody on the job, like we have plenty of people who are definitely younger than me, like on the NFL side, if I can help them with something, whether it's a phone number or a relationship or whatever, like I feel like that's part of my job too. And, it's all those little things, just like, I feel like they all matter. They should matter.
We'll wrap here with a question about the present. We were recording this in July. You're talking about you're just at the Big 12 meetings. This will probably run around the start of college football season. Let's talk Heisman. Let's talk about some of the players that you mentioned. Arch Manning, obviously he's going to be kind of the most well-known name, but who are some of the players you're kind of most excited? Maybe they don't have to necessarily be Heisman finalists, but like the players you're most excited to kind of follow this football season.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see what happens at LSU this year. Garrett Nussmeier is a guy, he's their quarterback. His dad is the OC, or the offense coordinator for the Saints, was an NFL quarterback, and Garrett's very talented, and he waited his turn, obviously behind a Heisman winner in Jaden Daniels, and they have spent a ton of money at LSU for this year. Brian Kelly, it's year 4. You got to win now. They have a big game right out of the gate at Clemson. Brian Kelly has not won a season opener since he's been in Baton Rouge. I think Garrett's a guy who could be a top 10 pick, but that's an intriguing situation with program and quarterback and player. And I think that one stands out. I'm fascinated to see like what life is like for Ryan Day after winning the national title, but you still have this losing streak against your hated arch rival. You have 2 new coordinators. Matt Patricia comes in. He's not been in college. See how that goes. I'm fascinated to see what happens with Patricia's mentor at North Carolina, Bill Belichick. I'm like really fascinated. Like I work with Stu Mandel, who's like yourself, a Northwestern guy, and I would kind of like wince whenever Stu would like not crap on him, but he'd be like, "Well, it didn't work out for Chan Gailey." I'm like, "Chan Gailey didn't win six Super Bowls, Stu. You know, I think you're not like, I get it. He's 73 years old, but he's also like the greatest coach in the history of the NFL because of all the Super Bowls he won. I don't think you're like, again, but it's college football. It's way different now than it was. So what does that look like? Does it look like he's, you know, if he goes 8-4, that's a good first year, but how long is he going to be there? How well will he relate to NIL agents and all the stuff that now is the reality in college football? So I'm interested in that. I'm definitely curious. Jeremiah Love, terrific running back, you know, super exciting at Notre Dame. You know, it's been a while since Notre Dame has like broken through. They've gotten good. They played for the national title last year. Can they take the next big step with that? I mean, we just saw Ashton Genty have like a spectacular year, but he was at Boise State. I don't want to diminish it, but the numbers, you know, he played basically two good teams. And now we have another running back who I think has a chance to win the Heisman, but it's hard to have those back-to-back spectacular years. But we'll see if he can do that.
It's it's my favorite sport to watch, college football. As a fan, I love it. As much as this sport has changed, I still love it, and it's been fun to be your colleague, Bruce, and fun to follow your stuff. And actually, did have a prop. I do have Meat Market, your book.
Oh, thank you.
In my bookshelf. One of you've gotten a few bylines, a few books out there, so folks can check that out, and of course check out your work at The Athletic, and you'll be on Fox again this season.
I will. Big noon. It's crazy that we have the Joe Davis connection, because
Yes.
It was like when I worked with him, like I was the sideline guy with Joe for a while. I said to somebody, I was like, you know, when I'm really old, I'll be able to be like, yeah, I work with Joe, you know, because like, you know, hopefully he'll be going for as long as his predecessor did, but you know, maybe not. But even if he's going for another 30 years, that's a pretty prodigious run.
Yeah, and you thought that before you even knew he'd be the first guest on this podcast, which is just another thing for his loaded resume.
Yes.
I did remind him that I don't think it's a coincidence that he won the Sports Emmy a couple months after the episode ran. So
that means Amin should be getting some space left on his trophy shelf next year.
We will try to make this podcast the pipeline to award season.
I think those guys are way more capable of winning it for TV awards than I will at this point. But it's a fun job.
Well, Bruce, thanks again for taking time. Thanks for telling us how you broke in, and folks will check out your stuff all college football season.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a pleasure.